It was a stifling, humid night in late July, and I could smell the jasmine that sprawled over the side wall of the building that stood opposite. Beneath it, as always in the summer, was the stale, slightly medieval smell of drains. The crying was quieter now, and yet persistent, as if the misery ran deep. It sounded more like a man, I thought, than a woman. Back inside, I pulled on a denim skirt and a t-shirt, then I picked up my keys and left the apartment. When I reached the entrance to the car park, I felt a shiver of apprehension, but I shook it off and started down the concrete slope. At the bottom was a kind of cabin or kiosk. The man on duty most nights was a melancholy Venezuelan called Hector. He almost always brought his Alsatian, Rocky, to work with him. For companionship, he told me, rather than security. After all, Saria wasn't exactly dangerous. I peered through the window. On the desk were a styrofoam cup of coffee, still half full, and a copy of Mundo Deportivo. There was no sign of Hector. Perhaps he had heard the crying himself and had gone off to investigate. Or perhaps he had taken Rocky for a walk. There was a special sandy area for dogs about 300 metres away, on the other side of Avenue de Foch. I moved on, into the car park. The walls were dark blue to waist height and cream above, and the air smelled of spilled oil. "Hello?" I called out. "Is anybody there?" The stillness of the cars seemed temporary, as if they were living things holding their breath. Some 50 yards away, there was another slope that dipped down to a lower level. I doubted I would have heard the crying if it had come from there. Then, just as I was thinking of turning back, I saw him. He was bent over a Range Rover, his forearms resting on the bonnet, his face concealed. He looked young, 19 perhaps, or 20. When I stopped nearby, he lifted his head and looked at me. His face was wet, though he was no longer crying. I spoke to him in Spanish. "Are you all right?" Then I said the same thing again, in English. Wiping his eyes on the inside of his wrist, he glanced beyond me warily, as if he suspected I might not be alone. He was wearing a dark red short-sleeved shirt and a pair of jeans that looked new. Something told me he had made an effort that evening. He had dressed up to go out. "Do you need help?" I asked. He looked at me and spoke in French, his voice subdued, no more than a murmur. I had studied French at school, but it wasn't a language I knew well. I had only a few basic phrases. "Est-ce que je peux vous aider?" He looked at his feet. "Viens avec moi." I took him gently by the arm and guided him back through the car park, towards the ramp that led up to the street. "Mon appartement," I said. "Ce n'est pas loin." He muttered something I didn't catch. Where was he from? North Africa, I thought. Probably Morocco. The city was full of Moroccans. People often complained there were too many. On our way out, we passed the lighted kiosk, but Hector and Rocky hadn't returned. I'd let go of the young man's arm and he was walking beside me. I noticed that he moved awkwardly. If he was in pain, though, he seemed determined not to show it. As we reached the top of the slope, I remembered the French word for hurt. I turned to him and said, "Vous êtes blessé?" He threw me another wary look, then stared straight ahead. I chose not to pursue it. Once we had rounded the corner, I pointed to my building. "Ici." I hadn't yet worked out what I was going to do with him. I hadn't thought that far ahead. I imagined he would sit at my kitchen table and drink a glass of water or a cup of tea. It would be a quiet place where he could recover. If he wanted to talk, I would listen. If not, I wouldn't press him. Later, when he felt better, I would call him a taxi. I opened the door to my apartment and he followed me, but he stopped just inside and stood with his back.